Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois joins us now. He was the only Democrat to vote against the House bill, joining us now from Chicago. Congressman, thanks so much for taking the time this evening.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
When you and I spoke earlier on Saturday, you called this vote a victory, given that it does not include additional funding for Ukraine, a victory for Vladimir Putin. Tell us why.
Well, look, I think the comments coming out of Kyiv reflect that. They were very concerned. We showed the rest of the world the only way we can fund the most important NATO ally in this fight is by taking Ukrainian funding out of the measure. I think that sends a strong message out there. Perhaps as disturbing as that is the historical vote just a couple nights ago when there was a standalone funding measure for the Ukraine conflict, and it lost in the Republican caucus. Perhaps, I guess, the death knell of the Reagan doctrine, born of the Republican Party, now supported by more Democrats than Republicans.
The Republican Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and Democrats in the Senate say they will look at Ukraine funding again. In other words, keep the government from shutting down tonight. We'll get to Ukraine funding. Do you believe those pledges?
I have a lot more hope that the Senate will do this. I'm concerned that the hardliners, the farthest extreme handful, this isn't the tail wagging the dog, it's the tip of the dog's tail wagging the body politic. The day of reckoning with the Speaker is coming, and I think this is what's front and center. Look, Marjorie Taylor Greene came out of caucus and said, we're not funding Ukraine. Somehow this issue became their linchpin in this fight. So I'm very concerned. That's why I voted no in the first place, because the Senate had a bipartisan bill, including the Ukraine funding, that would have passed in the House. We got rolled for no good reason.
You speak to your Republican colleagues. You work with them on bipartisan legislation. When you press them on this issue, how do they explain their opposition to further military aid to Ukraine, particularly at this point of the war? Ukraine is attempting a counteroffensive to claw back territory that Russia, of course, took illegally in a bloody invasion, the biggest war in Europe since World War II. How do your Republican colleagues explain wanting to stop that aid?
You know, it depends on which half we're talking about. I'm an appropriator, and most of the Republican appropriators I work with are more centrist. They're much more likely to defend funding Ukraine. It is the extreme right, who I think has somehow gotten, from the Trump boost that's coming out there, made this their strongest point. And of course, they're all facing Republican primaries, and I think that's starting to concern them. You know, I even heard Republican members of the Ukrainian caucus say, why should we help them when our people in our country are hurting? They need to be reminded that this is the same. We're supporting Ukraine for the exact same reasons we fought the Second World War. It is in our interest. It's why we formed NATO. It's why we formed the United Nations. And of course, for those who are out there very concerned about Beijing with designs on Taiwan, Beijing is watching this vote, and I think they feel bolstered as well as Putin.
No question. I went to Taiwan myself a number of weeks ago, and folks there make a direct tie between events in Ukraine, the world's response in Ukraine, to their potential fate. But before we go, crisis averted, but for 45 days. What happens in a month and a half?
If we don't get to it in the next 30 days, then in 45 days, we're going to be exactly where we were today. I saw people patting each other on the back and clapping and saying this was a bipartisan victory. Let's look at the record recently. We came within an inch of defaulting on our debt. We just now came within inches of a shutdown. This is not how the most important democracy in the world should function. Our dysfunction, our inability to govern, is a national security threat beyond all the other reasons we shouldn't shut down. It's a scary time.
Congressman Mike Quigley, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.